This week, Dr. Ed Harris from Mauser Packaging Solutions is with us to discuss securing OT environments. Stay tuned for Below the Surface. This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Welcome to Below the Surface, episode number 33, being recorded for Wednesday, July 3rd, 2024. I'm, of course, your host, Paul Asadorian. Alan Alford won't be joining us this week. Hopefully, he'll be back for the next episode. A quick announcement before we get started. Below the Surface listeners can learn more about Eclypsium by visiting eclypsium.com/go. There you'll find the ultimate guide to supply chain security. You'll find a presentation I did titled Unraveling Digital Supply Chain Threats and Risk. You'll find a paper on the study on the relationship between ransomware and the supply chain, and a customer case study with DigitalOcean. If you're interested in seeing a product in action, you can sign up for a demo, all that at eclypsium.com/go. Today, we're talking about securing OT environments with Dr. Ed Harris, who is the Global Director of Information Security from Mauser Packaging Solutions. Ed has a doctorate in Information Assurance and Cybersecurity and has 33 plus years of network and security experience. Ed, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Paul.
It's nice to have you here, Ed. Give us a little background about yourself. How'd you get your start in information security?
Oh man, I'm like everyone else. I played in programming. Was my first gig right out of college, and I worked on the security database programming in C along some 30-something years ago. And my next gig was moving into the Novell space, and so I got into network security, securing accounts. Making sure shares are protected, things of that nature, that the assets were protected, and continue to move on from there. Routing, switching, firewalls, VPN concentrators, Wi-Fi, all the normal stuff that was the predecessor to what is the cybersecurity industry today.
Fantastic. And how'd you come to get your current position at Mauser Packaging?
So it's one of those. So first of all, my network is what led me to where I'm at. I had a buddy who's he's like, hey, there's a company in Atlanta that they need some help starting up an InfoSec program. You interested in taking one from a greenfield from 0 to 100? And I'm like, sure, sounds like fun. Let's do it. And so I went down and worked a small engagement and remember on my way back to the airport to fly back out, getting a call from the CISO saying, we have to have you. And I'm like,
that's awesome.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a great feeling. Everyone should feel that way at least once in their career. So I went down and started from a green field and grew the organization, my InfoSec organization, to what it is today that covers our organization across 5 different continents.
Yeah, it's quite the organization that you work for. When we think of a packaging company, we can think of different things, but give us a little about the Mauser Packaging.
So we're the largest rigid packaging manufacturer in the world. And what I mean by rigid packaging, we make packaging out of steel, plastic, and fiber. So think as small as butter tubs. We make the paint cans that are sold at Lowe's and Home Depot. We make the 5-gallon buckets for both Lowe's and Home Depot. And then we make things all the way up to 55-gallon drums. And then our largest container is it's called an IBC. It's an intermediate bulk container. So think of a 275-gallon milk jug on a pallet wrapped in rebar, and those are primarily used for agricultural industry, where they'll load up their fertilizers and such, and then take those out across the fields. But when most people think of packaging, they think of plastic bags, paper bags, corrugated boxes. We're not into any of that. We're rigid packaging.
And you've got quite the manufacturing process, right? That facilitates a pretty large OT environment. Is that true?
Yeah. So again, because we manage, we manufacture, we even custom manufacture packaging based on what our customers require. Like for example, one of the things that we manufacture is a sharps container, and if you go into
Mm.
at your healthcare facility, you go to your doctor, and you see a sharps container mounted on the wall. If it says Daniel's Healthcare, that is a Mauser packaging solution. It's rigid, it's protected. You drop your sharps in, and you don't worry about getting cut or hurt or anything like that. But then again, we manufacture 55-gallon drums for the petroleum industry. We make paint cans, whether it's a metal can with a tap on top or the pourable gallon that you see in different varieties at your popular hardware stores. So yeah, we really make a lot of unique things, and I mean all the way down to butter tubs. We make if you go to Walmart and you see the Tide Pods comes in that pretty orange circular container.
Hmm.
We make that for the Tide Corporation.
So making all that custom packaging means you have a lot of probably custom engineering in environments as such, right?
We do. So everything that we make is either by our own design or by the customer's requirements, and it's kind of nice because the customer they've got this solution that they need to deliver, and let's call it Raid insect repellent. Does Raid get into the delivery system? No, they need a delivery system. They need an aerosol can. They don't specialize in aerosol cans. They specialize in the chemistry that goes into that aerosol can. So
Mm.
we make the cans that they need so that they can deliver their solutions. And if they need a custom top, if they want a metal top, a plastic top, we have the ability to make all of that. Again, we specializing in plastic, steel, and fiber. But yeah, literally, we make our own machines that makes our products.
That's awesome. That means there's a lot of computers involved in that, I would imagine.
A lot of it is in the design phase. We got a
Sure. Yeah.
full CAD operation and everything. We design, we understand. Like as we're fitting components together that drives conveyor belts and moves steel and heats it up and melts plastic down and forms it. And we have blow molders. We've got just all sorts of interesting components that takes this raw material, converts it into what we need it to be, and then we mold it into something that our customer can use. And from there it has any number of applications, and sometimes applications spill over from one customer to another, and that's pretty
Sure.
exciting when we can reuse
Yeah.
things.
Reuse. Yeah,
uh,
but there must be a lot of sensors in the manufacturing
oh,
process and a lot of automation too, right?
quite a bit, quite a bit.
And how do you keep that stuff safe on your network? Because obviously that's business critical. Manufacturing can't just shut down, otherwise you're not producing product in
Yeah,
time.
so one of the things that that most companies struggle with is, how do I keep my OT environment safe? And it's like, well, so where are your gaps in your security? What have you allowed out to the internet? And one of my first questions that I always ask the company is, have you undertaken an IT to OT convergence project? And they're like, oh yeah, we can from our production network, we can see into the OT network, and our engineers can see this and that, and they can do all of these things, and they can do it remote, and they can do it from home, and shoot, they can sit out and do it from their mobile phones out in their car. And I'm like, there's your problem. What you've
Yeah,
done, you've
opened up all that access.
massive hole
Yeah.
into your revenue stream. Let's just refer to the OT environment as a revenue stream, because it's what it is. It's where we make our product. And if I punched a great big old hole in there because I wanted to make it convenient for a bunch of engineers, you know what I've done? I've opened the door and and given the bad actors a conduit into my revenue stream. And so I always encourage companies to go back and rationalize their need for that IT to OT convergence, and ask them, how much of this do you really need to have online right now? And is there a better way that you can protect this? I mean, for example, you could very easily, back out some of that direct connection into your production environment, and then perhaps make if you need to do reporting and it needs to be out into the production environment or it needs to be out to the internet, oh, just make that one-way traffic. Allow it from the network, from the OT environment out. But yeah, when these companies are like, going, man, I've got this massive environment, I need to protect it, and I'm like, tell me what you're doing today. Oh, we've got readouts and planes and boards and TV monitors all over the place. And I'm like, is any of that in your production environment? Is that in your OT environment? I was like, oh no, it's in production. We can see it because we can patch our TVs and we can patch our sensors. And I'm like, who patches your equipment? And they're like, well, we work through that with IT. And I'm like, you let IT touch your OT equipment? And they're like, well, yeah, don't you? And I'm like, no.
Yeah, you have a different approach from that in
Oh
your
yeah.
environment, right?
I don't want the IT team touching the OT environment. It's not their specialty. They're not the subject matter experts. My engineering team is the subject matter experts over that OT. They're the SMEs over the environment that they
Hmm.
built. And um, so what I do, we isolate our OT environment, and when it comes time to patching, what I do is I built this really really nice communication and dotted line with our engineering leaders around the world. And what I do is I take the time, I go out, I learn what vulnerabilities exist in the OT space, and I get a lot of my data from CISA, and then I publish that internally to our engineering staff. And from there, the engineers, they take that information. They're like going, okay, all right, so we've got a series of PLCs that have a material weakness. We don't have this PLC. This vulnerability notice doesn't apply to us at this plant, but it might apply to somebody at another plant. So I don't really discern what equipment that I have, because then that means I have to stay abreast of everything that
Right.
we have across the organization. And again, that's the OT network. That's the
And so
responsibility.
good asset management on your OT network in the hands of the engineers that are working with that gear every
Sir.
day,
Yes,
right?
sir.
Is the
It's
yeah.
all day long. And so they're obligated to keep that environment up and running. And so what I do is I arm them with the details of known vulnerabilities, and what they do is they go out and they'll pull down the most current firmware revision, whatever it is that mitigates the risk. And then we have an engineering change management solution where we track changes of what goes into the OT environment, and then the engineers are responsible for uploading those changes and getting our equipment patched. And
But that process and enablement of that engineering team, Ed, is really what allows you to maintain a well-formed air gap. I think where air gap gets a bad reputation is it's not really air gapped. In your case, you're like, no, it is air gap because the only people that are touching it are the engineers on that
are the
team.
engineers. Yeah, yeah. We don't
Mhm.
we don't like IT people playing in the OT environment. That's not their specialty. And not to mention the fact that IT tools have the tendency to be a little obtrusive, and because so take a controller on a piece of operational technology. It's
Mhm.
really a pretty simplistic device. A little bit of a reduced instruction set, Linux, small board, a few little transistors and diodes, and an interface, and that's about it. And so you go in with a vulnerability management system that's going in and scanning. It's just going to wipe out that little
Mhm.
Linux box. And so you really have to have specialized OT equipment to do vulnerability assessment. They exist. It costs money,
Mhm.
but it does exist. And and we could go in and implement that, or I can simply mitigate my risk by simply air gapping my OT network, only allow people in with specialized boxes. There's nothing special about the laptops that they use to go in and upload the tools. They just don't
But
get to.
it's separate, and we see that in a lot of government military networks, right? There's the
Mhm.
classified computer network, and
Sure.
then the regular one with the internet, and they're separate computers, basically.
Precisely. And so they'll go in, they'll update the machines, and then they'll update their documentation that this PLC went from this version of the firmware to that version of the firmware, what date it happened, who performed it, what shift did it happen on, which plants did it occur in, how many do we have of these worldwide. And so there's an engineering change management team that tracks all of that, just as if it were a regular PC getting a patch from
Mhm.
Microsoft.
Right.
We
How do you manage the PCs that are on the air gapped network, right? Because they don't have traditional internet access bidirectional, right? So is that a special process to manage?
no,
Like, because there's
it's
probably HMIs, right, and engineering
yep.
laptops that only exist on the OT network.
Yeah, it's pretty simplistic, because there's no internet connectivity at all in that area, and so I don't have to worry about that so much. And so we do our best to help the affect the update of the operating systems when there are PCs that have to have additional functionality to run a machine.
Hmm.
But otherwise, they're almost they're little like Wise terminal, little thin client terminals that just simply plug into a connector. You run a little terminal session, you upload a little bit of data, and then it's done. But otherwise, it stays super simple to manage, super simple to operate. Um, Probably a hacker's dream if they could bridge the gap, but yeah. Otherwise, we try to keep that nice and separated from the balance of the organization, just because it is our revenue stream.
Right, right. Are concerned about things that would bridge the air gap, and what mitigations do you put in place or detections for that?
Yeah. So, and that's always a challenge because I have to rely on people doing the right things. We'll provide them with a laptop to use specifically in the OT environment. But what happens if an engineer in a hurry grabs their production laptop, runs out on the floor, and has to make an emergency change because a process is running too quick, or a conveyor is running too slow, or materials not being delivered in enough time to hit the furnace, or whatever. Sometimes I have to rely on the fact that the engineers are doing the right things on behalf of the organization. But if they walk outside with their production laptop, plug it into the OT network, and affect a change, if their wireless NIC is turned on, they just bridge the gap right back
Mm,
into the production network. And it becomes a little bit of a, obviously there's increased risk when that occurs, right? So, the fundamental question is that do we have good controls in our production network to be sure that we don't have any bad actors in the environment? And I'd say, we do a reasonable job, like everyone else does a reasonable job. We've got good methods of detection. We've got a global SOC that sees um, what's happening with our sensor equipment related to ingress and egress points, things going on with the VPN concentrators and firewalls and things of that nature. And so, we've got a reasonable confidence that we're bad actor free, so to speak. So when that engineer does have to make that emergency change, it does increase our risk profile a little bit for a few minutes while that's going on, but it is minimized as much as is reasonable.
Or I did an interview a long time ago where we talked about the details inside the technology that provides OT networks with that air gap, with that safety, right? And there's like a diode inside these specialized firewalls that only let traffic out and doesn't
Mhm.
let traffic in. And that's not a soft rule. What I learned years ago is it's actually a physical, like the device is made to only allow traffic one way, and you can't change it unless you swap out the electronics inside of it.
Yeah,
Is
I
that
mean,
technology in play still?
I haven't heard anything like that in a while. I know that a lot of companies are beginning to basically just drop, small office, home office, Soho firewalls into place because it gives them the flexibility. If I want my network air gapped, then I just simply remove the firewall altogether. If I
Mm,
need to allow some traffic out, because I need to update a monitor in the break room that says, what our run
yeah.
rates are or something like that, I can put that firewall into place and allow traffic out, and all it is traffic to a monitor. But what happens if I need to do something? Maybe I need to get a third party looking at a piece of equipment, an HMI, a PLC that's misbehaving. How would we do that? Well, we would still do that with a firewall. We would enable a rule to allow an engineer to escort a third party connecting, over Teams or something like that to remote in and affect the resolution of a piece of equipment. Um, so I don't know that I've seen too many devices that are just purely one way devices without having the flexibility of the company making decisions, on an as needed basis to enable bidirection. But it has to be a really good reason to want to take on that additional risk profile to open that up. But it's been done before.
Mm.
It does give the company a lot of flexibility, though.
It sounds like culture was a big part of the security program, which I think it's amazing, right? And like when I ask my pen tester friends, like, what's the hardest organization to pen test? And they're like, well, it's the one where everyone is empowered to observe and affect change in the context of security. And it sounds like you have one of those organizations, which is it's not technology, it's more people than it is
Yeah,
technology, right?
yeah. One of the things that I did with my group is so the infosec team has zero privileges in our world. We're strategy, we're oversight, we're governance, but we leave the operation of the equipment. And let's talk about this on the production network side. We leave the operation of the equipment to the people who know the equipment best. We've got
Hmm.
a team of network engineers. They're the ones who make the router, switch, and firewall changes. We've got a team of Active Directory engineers. They're the ones who makes all the changes in Active Directory when we need a security posture tweak. And so, to the greatest effect possible, I've extricated my team from having those privileges. And it's like, well, gosh, in an emergency, you need to be able to do whatever you need to do to protect the company. Yes, I do. But we've also got a team that works, we're 24/7 operation. We've got IT and security folks around the world. I can always get somebody at the end of the phone call as soon as I pick up the phone. And so if I need an Active Directory change, I can get it made right away. And then I can file change control and get it covered in our regular change management solution. But I don't want the InfoSec group to go in and start making firewall rule changes and routers and switching, because that's not what we're good at. We specialize in risk and posture management for the organization. And then I rely on my networking engineers, the people who make the firewall changes and such, to do the right things, build the rules in the right way. They just have to prove to me that they've got it done afterwards. So we have a good governance program. We follow up with, making sure that changes that are made, even in an emergency, are still covered by tickets and approval processes, even if we have to make them on the fly before the tickets even entered into the system. So we really got a good work culture. So my team is not operational in that if something goes down, we get to go log in and we get to go start bringing things back up. That we don't work that way. We've got subject matter experts who do all of that, and then my team oversees those actions to make sure that we can say yes, we approve the posture that's going into place.
How much do you worry about something coming into the environment that is what I call pre-owned, right? Like somewhere before it's gotten to your manufacturing facility, let's say, and it's about to be deployed, and it's already got malware on it or some kind of backdoor. Do you worry
Yeah,
about that? Do you have processes
yeah,
to check
yeah.
that
We
stuff?
we yeah we don't allow that kind of stuff on the network until it's gone through some round of checking.
Hmm.
We do have we have our degree of sandboxes around the world where we can drop that kind of stuff into, and a lot of stuff is delivered even virtually these days, and that's even better because we can drop that into a VMware or Nutanix
Hmm.
cluster or any of the other hypervisors, and kind of run it for a bit and see what it does and see what kind of network connections it's trying to call upon and protocols used, and and things that are that come in that may be inherently insecure, like, oh, we just love it when a machine uses FTP.
Yeah.
You go back to the manufacturer and say, hey, listen, can we at least get this upgraded to secure FTP, or can we use another secure protocol? And it's a bit few and far between that we have to deal with these technologies that are inherently insecure. But I'll tell you what, it wouldn't be the first time that I opened up an update package from a large software manufacturer in the Washington State area, where I got malware on my machine on the next update.
Right. Right. Yeah, so that pre-validation before deployment is part of your strategy, and I think
Yeah,
super important too. Yeah.
yeah, and it is, and our engineers are really cognizant of that fact, because the last thing that they want to do is destroy their own environment that they're responsible
Right.
for.
Introduce something
Oh
that would cause
yeah,
malice inside the network. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So we use technology from known good companies. When it comes to even to firmware. It's like, well, okay, so what if the firmware has malware in it? Man, I got to have a degree of trust in the
Hmm.
manufacturer of the equipment, that their due diligence to not introduce malware into their firmware that I'm going to eventually download and run in my equipment that was manufactured by their company. So there's a degree of trust there that I have to have, because at the end of the day, man, I don't write firmware for a living. I don't. It's
Right,
not.
right. Yeah, it's hard. I mean, it
Yeah,
is
I
a
mean,
shared responsibility, but you're right. We
exactly.
can't gloss over the fact that the OEMs and manufacturers, not your
Sure.
manufacturers, but your suppliers that are manufacturing stuff for you, have a process, and I'm sure you have a process to evaluate before you
Yeah.
purchase from them. Right, most
Yeah,
folks in
yeah, we
your
do.
position do that. Yeah.
We purchase known good equipment. We're like everyone else. I don't want version one of anything. Yeah,
Hmm.
let me know when the first service pack is released, or when version two comes out. At that point in time, they've worked out the kinks and the bugs. And again, we're talking about engineering equipment and OT stuff here. And so our engineers are they're pretty smart people. They know who are the good companies to buy from, and who are not. And if you look back at the history of OT suppliers and the equipment that they supply, all it takes is for them to get a bad name because they delivered a piece of
Yeah.
firmware with malware in it, and man, their sales are going to tank, and so they have to really be on their A game for everything they do, because their solutions help run the world. So
Does your security monitoring in the OT network live within that network, and you've got engineers that are doing that, right? Because it's not connected to the IT team and your
yeah.
global ops team or whatever, right?
Yeah, their monitoring's different than ours. So they
Hmm.
they in a regular production network, I'm monitoring what's going on the endpoint. I'm monitoring traffic and how it moves throughout the course of the organization. How well are VMs running? The normal stuff that we would monitor from a security perspective. In the engineering space, they're more of an operational monitor. Is my conveyor belt that's delivering the raw material moving at the rate that the furnace needs raw material to be dropped
Hmm.
in, so that it moves in time. And it's like, well, okay, if a particular machine is producing 15 widgets an hour and we needed to produce 20 widgets an hour because we've got multiple orders backing up, they can go in and tweak the whole roadshow of a particular machine to say, okay, deliver raw material 5 widgets faster, turn the heater up a little bit more so that we can melt the product down and get it ready 5 seconds sooner. And so there is monitoring. It's just more operational monitoring rather than security monitoring.
Right, which could be indicative of a security incident, right? If I mean, we see a lot of incidents. Was
Sure.
it a hacker? Was it just environment? Was it just faulty software?
Oh
Right,
yeah.
but your monitoring is going to take that into account. If someone was going to mess with that stuff,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
would
I
you
can't
would
figure out why
notice.
why is my conveyor belt moving so slow. And it's like, oh, you know what? We didn't run maintenance on that conveyor belt in the last cycle, and so we've got buildup, and it's actually causing the motor to work harder because the
Mhm.
wheels are running slower. It's like, okay, well, that's not really a cyber attack, but it's indicative of how well the operation is running.
Yeah, a well run operations department like that, right? It will catch security things because
Sure.
you're monitoring everything so closely from an operational standpoint. And I think we've always said that. We can sit here and not be in operations and say all we want, right? And we're just
Right.
pundits kind of talking. But one of the points that we have is a well run operations speaks to security and having a higher level of security, right? Because you
Yeah.
know what should be happening. You're monitoring for any kind of variances from the norm is another thing we talk about, right? And you're doing that in an operational environment. It's equally as important.
Yeah, and our engineers probably don't look at it, that they are representing the infosec team in paying attention and that level of monitoring, but they have a level of responsibility and security over the OT that they're responsible for. And so, while we've not officially deputized them to be infosec eyes and ears in
Sure.
our environment, but that's exactly what they are. And they're very quick to say, hey, listen, we're not sure that this is really an infosec related item, but we've got something a little weird going on, and we just want an extra set of eyes on it from a cyber perspective.
Yeah. So
Perfect.
you trained your team to observe things and know enough about security related issues that
Oh
they
yeah.
know how to handle that incident, right?
Yeah.
Which is not every team out there. I mean, good for you.
No,
That's great.
no, it's it's an interesting skill. At the end of the day, everyone has some degree of security built into the nature of who they are. If you're a parent, you take your kid to the bus stop. Do you let your kid stand out there on the street? No, of course not. You're probably, as a parent, you're going to stand next to them. Why? Because you care about the end product that you've got in front of you, and we call that your child. And so even these engineers, they're like on this, this new machine's my baby, and I want to make sure this thing
Yeah.
comes up
Yeah.
right. I want to, I've got
Right.
dropped a brand new operating system on the workstations that's got to run it. And we've tweaked everything. Firmware is good to go. We're getting ready to light this up for the first time. We're going to run some test runs for a week and make sure that everything falls within tolerances. And then we're gonna run some product through it and see what kind of trouble we can cause.
And how much over the years, I've covered so many research articles. Usually they're academic. They start off as academic papers.
Hmm.
I don't know how many we've actually seen in the wild. That actually would be a really cool conference talk. But I've seen bridging air gap networks, right? The covert channels, it's also called. And there's always a few per year, and it's a variation on a theme. It's I can blink the lights on a system, and then remotely outside the air gap I can transmit data, right? I can change the fan speed. I mean, there's all the monitors. I mean, there's all the crazy RF. I mean, all kinds of things with RF emissions, right? Do you worry about the air gap bridging and kind of this research science that we see?
If our facility was wide open where bad actors could walk in, I probably would be much more paranoid than what I am now. So let's take a simple example. Let's just say that you have a manufacturing facility in which customers were allowed to periodically walk out on the floor to look at the proofs
Hmm.
of their product as they're coming off the line. How difficult would it be to drop in a little tiny microphone that simply listened to the clicks of a keyboard
Yeah.
that's controlling that machine?
We've
Well,
seen that. I've seen like 3 research papers right in the past year that are like we can collect keystrokes remotely, right?
exactly. You can
Hmm.
detect a keystroke by the frequency that's emitted when the key is pressed. And so I can tell what your password is to log into that computer. I can tell how fast you were running it, when you were running it, and for how long you were running it. And you told me that you were producing, 20 widgets an hour, and I can tell you that's a lie because we infiltrated your organization and we can prove to you that it was only 15 widgets per hour. And it's like that kind of, and if we had that type of wide open environment, that would really uh, would really cause more attention on my end. But this is a high speed manufacturing environment. We don't allow anyone except for authorized personnel wearing protective gear out into
Yep.
our manufacturer space to include glasses and helmets and mask where appropriate and hard toe shoes and all forklifts are only allowed to work in certain lanes and you have to have hearing protection all the time and sometimes the hearing protection is well, did you not hear that forklift coming when they were honking their horn? Oh, you put earbuds inside your headphones, so you really weren't paying attention to what you were doing. Now we
Hmm.
haven't had any kind of
Right. But
cases where.
physical security is important in your
Sure it is,
manufacturing
absolutely.
facilities, right? So you have to test it. You have to constantly
Yeah,
do
man.
education and training of your employees on it, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, you go to work safely. We want you to be able to go home safely at the end of the night.
Yeah, so it's part of your safety process to
It is.
not
It is a
to
culture.
observe, right? Yeah, no one's
It is.
tailgating into facility. They're aware of those kind of attacks and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have an IT all hands meeting once a month, and the very first topic at the beginning of every meeting is plant safety,
Hmm.
because we send people into plants. You've got to go in and replace a Wi-Fi router that's stopped working, or you've got to go on site to one of our facilities and replace a handful of computers, or you've got to actually go out on the plant floor and go look at some wires or transmission or something. And we make sure that all of our even our IT employees understand, when you get to the plant, you're going to go and have a quick briefing with the safety director, and you're going to find out what you need to have. put on protection for your eyes, protection for
Hmm.
your ears, protection for your head. If you're getting into an area where you might touch something hot, you'll be wearing some safety gloves, and maybe even a safety apron, is in the case of working around some of our furnaces that melt our steel and stuff like that. And so, yeah, I mean, the whole culture of safety is, it's physical, it's emotional, it's
Yeah.
practical, it's IT security, it is cyber security, it is, it's really, it's a good culture to understand that you do these simple things when throughout the course of your day while you're working, you'll go home safe every single night to your family.
I think having that safety as one of the guiding principles really helped develop the security program around that, right? Because everyone was safety aware, and security is just really an extension of safety
Right.
that I think a lot of organizations miss, right? And can't make that leap as easily. But you had a culture of safety because, like you said, people want to go home and not
Right.
get injured, right? And security is part of that safety
Well, yeah, and
protocol.
and, and we're certainly talking from purely from a manufacturing environment. Let's move this talk for just a second into healthcare, where they
Yeah,
still have an OT environment, but you don't worry about
they,
forklifts running up and down the
right.
hallway in the
But
hospital.
they also have no physical security whatsoever, which is
Oh,
what is so dangerous about the healthcare OT and IT environments, right? Is
yeah, yeah,
anyone like in your manufacturing facility, if I just tried to walk in, I'm not saying someone couldn't, physical pen testers have their ways, right?
sure,
But they'd have to try really hard in your environment versus a healthcare environment where everyone's walking around anyway. I put a set of scrubs on, I can go anywhere in the hospital. I mean, I've talked to many pen testers that have told stories about how they got into a hospital because
yeah. How easy would it be to say, listen, I'm here to visit my aunt or uncle, and you're carrying your bag or your backpack. You could have a Yagi antenna in it. You could do some directional pin testing, and you could change somebody's life and death situation. I
yeah,
mean,
it is scary. I mean, the FDA has gotten better with regulations, although I'm sure you're not you're also familiar with regulations in your industry as well. We
sure,
talked about safety
right,
as well as lots of other regulations that apply.
yeah, yeah. Thank God I'm not in healthcare.
Yeah,
No offense to the
healthcare's
healthcare folks
no,
out
it's a difficult environment to
there. It is
protect.
a
I
difficult.
wanted to ask you, Ed, when you go to your engineers that are on the OT teams, oftentimes in a lot of other circumstances, I've found a lot of pushback on applying security fixes. It sounds like you don't have a lot of that friction. Was that something you had to work with the team, or there's something that in your company was just part of their nature already?
Yeah, well, so the nice thing is what I'm bringing them is advanced knowledge. I'm not asking you to make changes because I want you to make changes. I want you to be aware that there are known vulnerabilities associated with a particular firmware revision on a particular PLC that we
Hmm.
have deployed in our facility, and you have to make the business call around whether or not that update really needs to go in and whether or not we truly accept the risk or mitigate the risk. And if we're going to accept the risk, we have a good reason why we need to do that, because maybe a downstream product can't take the firmware update that's
Right.
getting ready.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
there's some logic to it.
There's
And
like an internal supply chain, and if you break that one link with a firmware update.
oh
Yeah,
yeah,
it
yeah,
could be
yeah.
bad.
So we never come to the table with the idea that we're going to cram something down the engineer's throat. This is their world. We respect the value that they bring to the table of managing this OT environment. We just want to be a good partner from a cyber perspective and bring them some knowledge that they might not have access to otherwise, and so that they can make a better decision about how we mitigate risk in the environment. Because again, they own their environment. I just want to be a good partner for them. When we first set up this communication with the engineers worldwide, we ran the program for about 2 months, and then I kind of took a step back and I asked them all. I said, "Give me your honest feedback. Does the information that I send you around vulnerabilities in these OT pieces of equipment, is that valuable for you?" Excuse me. And some of them, most of the folks are saying, you know what? I really love the fact that you're bringing me this data. I've never had visibility to it before. I feel like I'm better managing my firmware updates today than I ever have. And then I've had a few that have said, you know what? You just added one more thing to my to-do list that I've got to
Yeah.
do every day. And I'm like, well, so that's a function of your desire and your tolerance for risk. If you see me as an impediment to your day because I'm one more thing for you to
Hmm.
do, then you might want to ask yourself, is this the right environment for you? Because I can tell you that the company doesn't like to hold on to risk any more than what's absolutely necessary. We can
Yeah.
reduce risk. We can ensure a more successful delivery of our revenue stream. And so for those people who are saying, you know what, thank you for letting me know that that the doorknob on the front door to my house was weak. I'm going to get that replaced this weekend with a more robust doorknob. And others are like going, man, I know, listen, that doorknob's been wobbly for 29 years. We've just dealt with it. And I'm like, okay. I mean, you own that right. You own that risk. You own the right to decide whether or not you want to do the update based on business drivers that you're aware of that I might not be. I simply just wanted to be a good partner and bring you data that you haven't had access to before. And like I say, most of them have really enjoyed getting the updates just so that they can say, "Yep, we don't even run this PLC. This
Yeah.
is not applicable to me." And they
Right.
love knowing that they're staying in pretty much lockstep with the environmental drivers that lets us know when we've got a material weakness in a piece of operational technology.
I think your advice is so sound, Ed, when you said that the companies don't want to hold on to risk, right? You don't
Yeah,
want to accumulate technical debt. You don't want to keep accumulating that risk, and making your team aware of how detrimental that could
sure.
be in the future, I think helps bring them around to, this is part of my operational tasks. And it may be one more thing I have to do, but it's part of my operational responsibility.
Yeah, and companies really, they make these decisions all the time. Not to name any names, I know a company that still runs OS2 Warp.
Oh, that's really funny. I was an OS2 Warp admin in the 90s.
Oh man, and I'm like, and the machine still exists today. Nobody writes vulnerabilities for Warp, and it's easy. You stick it behind its own little personal firewall, and you've kind of gapped that a little bit, and that's fine and everything. But I'm like, is that piece of software that's running on that machine really that important to the environment, or is this just being lazy?
Yeah. And you've had some time to deal with that technical debt,
Yeah,
right?
gosh. I
I
mean,
think
how
it
many?
was years ago we talked about, there was a company, I think IBM handed off support for OS2 Warp to another company.
Mhm.
They outsourced it. And then I think that company stopped supporting it. And there was like OT, if I remember correctly, it was like a transportation company that was still running it for things.
Yeah, I mean, it was a multi-threaded DOS-based operating
Oh
system. It was
yeah. Oh man, at the time it was, yeah,
in
it
its
was
time, it
awesome.
was like, wow, it's a stink on the stick. I mean, I can run things simultaneously. Look at all of
Mm,
this fun stuff, and then, but and then technology moves forward. I mean, I can tell you, we got a lot of years out of Windows 7 environment because it was just a good, stable environment. It
yeah.
ran, it didn't have any problems. But again, it's the technical debt and the inability to defend against it, without having to firewall off entire sections of your organization.
Hmm.
And so, we sit down and we do risk assessments based on, the perceived overall risk to be able to defend in the event that that old box, is still on our network.
Right.
And so
Right.
we have an investment strategy where we regularly will update equipment just to bring it current with the times, which may mean moving away from a mom and pop shop that we've just been using for years and years. And by the way, my company's been in existence 153 years this
Yeah,
year.
I was gonna say your company must have been around for a long time,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
and we might have to move to a more current technology just to ensure our ability to defend against bad actors. And so, and that includes operational technology as well. Now we are air gap there, so we've got a bit more of a defense in there, and we can be a little bit more lenient. But at the end of the day, I don't own the risk posture of what goes on in the OT environment, but I do. I can identify it and understand it and help support the engineers who have to live it.
Mm. Also, Ed, you're involved with the ICIT. What is that?
Yeah, that's the Institute for Critical Infrastructure and Technology. It's a 501c3 think tank based in the Washington, D.C. area. There's a handful of research fellows who help produce research for critical infrastructure. I've been a research fellow with them for 2 years now, and so we help provide guidance to the federal government and military around critical infrastructure, transportation, water, electricity, these things, and the level of resiliency around it. One of the things that's really tough about the OT environment is the lack of security built into the inherent environment. Take this take a popular refrigerator model, for example. We now connect that thing to the internet, and we've got cameras looking in to see how much milk's left in the gallon, and you can pull up little built-in tablets into the door and build grocery lists and things of that nature, and have that thing dropped into your iPad or tablet or whatever it is that you've got. And it's like, these are such interesting convenience models. Why do we not consider securing that? And it's like, well, who cares about how much milk that I've got left in my gallon in my refrigerator? And I'm like, well, the dairy company does, but do you really want them peeking into your refrigerator
Mm,
and see what else you've got in there?
right.
Maybe you keep medication in there, and they would be able to see that as well. Do you want them, knowing, what you've been prescribed that has to be refrigerated? And can a bad actor work their way into your refrigerator and shut your compressor down?
Right. Right.
And that really becomes scary. I'm like, oh my God, why why do companies in these spaces not put a greater focus on security? I don't understand, the rationale behind that one way or the other. And again, that's not what I do to help solve the planet's woes. But I do support the think tank and help produce materials and research for critical infrastructure.
That's awesome. And are these reports available, or like, can you give me an example of a recent one, like a study or?
So we have a public to private partnership. Companies can buy services, and for anyone who's interested in knowing more about this, you can go to it's the if you go to itictech.org, you can certainly get more information. But if somebody just wants to reach back out to your show,
Mm,
you've got some names. I can certainly put them in touch with folks that can help make these publications available. It's available for a fee. It helps move other research along. But yeah, there was research released not too long ago about the energy grid, which we produce
mhm.
for the federal government and for state governments as well. I mean, they have their own challenges as well. But keeping critical infrastructure, keeping our ports safe, keeping our transportation up and running and safe, and the logistics associated with keeping truckers moving on the road in a safe environment, making sure that the energy grid stays up and running. We become so complacent sometimes, thinking that, well, gosh, when I flip on the light switch, the light is always going to turn on. And in this country, that's a real reality. You move to a third world country, and it's like you flip on the light switch, and maybe it turns on, and maybe it doesn't. Maybe it doesn't turn on until later on in the afternoon when the power grid's not so taxed in those areas. And so, when you begin to think about the fundamental nature of critical infrastructure, we depend on it so intently that sometimes we have to take a step back and say, what are we doing to protect our byways and waterways? What could a bad actor get somewhere upstream, release something, and it affect an entire population downstream?
Yeah, and having your experience weigh in on that and others, Ed, I think is super important, right? Because I think throughout this interview you've underscored the importance of recognizing connectivity and technology and the convenience versus security, right? And the refrigerator example, right? They call it smart,
It's a
and you're like,
smart
well, wait,
refrigerator.
is it really smart? Because that's like a marketing term. It
It
really
is.
is opening up to potential threats and inherent risk.
Yeah,
But they call it smart, so you're like, oh yeah,
yeah,
I want my appliance to be smarter, right?
yeah. I remember one of my hacker buddies one time was just, he's like, hey, listen, you want to see something really funny? And I'm like, sure, why not? He's like, so I got my smart TV um, to play a video that I went out and made my own video so that I can play that on my smart TV so that my Alexa could hear it, and the smart TV played my video and it said, hey, unlock the door. Alexa says, okay,
Yeah,
unlocking your front door. And
right.
you're like, oh my God, what if that happened for real?
Mm-hmm.
What if that happened for real? Or what about, Alexa, open my garage?
Yeah.
Things like that, people take into consideration the conveniences of being able to do these really cool things, and AI is no different. I love the idea of what AI is going to bring to the table, especially I would love to see the value of what it's bringing to the medical field, because if you could detect cancers faster, if you could diagnose children's issues sooner, if there was a way that we can mine data and help more mature folks to live longer, that's great. But man, there's a whole culture around the misuse of AI. I've got two talks that I'm giving later this year. One in Austin, Texas, and the other one in Barcelona, where I'm going to be talking about the troubles that AI can bring to the table if a bad actor were to misuse that data. And I mean, can you imagine if we tied in some AI into an OT environment where all you have to do is speak the command and the AI goes and changes
Mm.
a machine? What if a bad actor got a hold of that? I mean, it would just be ridiculous to even think about. I know, because why would we allow Alexa into our OT?
Right. Yes.
Right. I
Right.
mean,
But we've seen increased technology adoption, and you're right. It has
it
to
is.
be, you have to take security into account. If we don't, we
Yeah.
could be in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, that and if we could just simply deputize everyone into a culture of security, where you really think about, I'm going to bring a cool widget to the table. How could that widget be exploited?
Mm.
Is there some reasonable controls that we can put in that might just help make things better? And sometimes, a good control helps keep the honest people honest. But if the bad actors wants to get in, they'll find a way to get in. And of course, we can put all the controls in place, but they've got time, and that's their strong suit, is the amount of time that they've got to figure these things out. But
For sure.
yeah, got to wear your
Well,
superhero cape every day.
that's it. Well, Dr. Ed Harris, thank you so much for appearing on Below the Surface today.
Thank you very much for having me.
With that, we'll conclude the show. Thank you, everyone, for listening and watching. We'll see you next time.